Welcome, folks. Welcome back to another Electric Culture of Safety, Lineman Safety National webinar. This will be 039, almost a big 40. Today we'll be with Mike Starner. He's with NECA, National Electrical Contractor Association. He's the executive director of the outside line safety. About 3 years now. Yeah, about 3 years now, and that's about when I first met Mr. Mike, about 3 years ago. So anyways, we've been coming closer and closer together. Our paths keep getting closer and closer, and finally, bam, he's here today. He left snowy Maryland yesterday, coming down here to a nice Valentine's Day. So he's bringing lots of love, lots of warmth, and we're going to be in the 60s today. So this is going to be interesting. Typically, we have some slides. We have a PowerPoint, and Mike's like, nope, we're going to talk about the dark woods. That's the topic. And we're just going to go off the cuff. We're going to go organic. So it's like, hey, you know, whatever's on his heart, whoever comes here, whatever they want to do, that's what we got to do. So that's what you're going to get today. Just real brief, we have about 12,000 registered partners now with Electric Culture of Safety, and 2 years now. We're going on year number 3 as of this month. So it's been an amazing ride, and it's just so awesome and interesting to see everybody coming together and connecting and synchronizing what we're trying to do to ensure that our heroes of light come back home once their task is complete. And so we just thank Mr. Mike. Appreciate you being here, brother.
Oh, thanks for having me. And you know, Brent, it's not uncommon. Well, it's not unusual that you said, you know, 3 years ago, that's when you started to see me out and about, right? And so in 21, NECA's leadership said, we have to, you know, get somebody on our staff that's dedicated to the issues that are affecting our outside line community. So our outside line contractors are folks that do utility construction work. So generation, transmission, and distribution, and you know everything in between, offshore wind, and you know, you name it, right? And so the very first thing I wanted to do was just kind of beat the street and get out there and really understand, you know, where's NECA's place in the industry? Where can NECA have some positive influence in the industry? And, you know, honestly, I feel like it was a gift from God to have the opportunity to do this, right? So I think probably most of the people listening are hoping that they get to the point in their career where they get to take advantage of all their life experiences and you have a chance to pay it back, right? And so that's what I get a chance to do, right? So I get around, I get a sense of what's going on in the industry. I provide direct support for our members who need it. But really, I represent electrical contracting as a whole. And when we have a seat at the table and we can represent the interests of our members, there's a secondary effect that spills over to the whole industry.
So this is so interesting. Mike and I had a great dinner last night, and I got home. My wife's like, "You've been gone for almost 2.5 hours," and it's like I had no clue. Mike and we just started talking and sharing stories, and actually, I can't believe how parallel our stories are. And so share a little bit, Mike. Let's go back to young Mike. Let's go back to how you were being molded and shaped by the ebb and flow of your life and how things were turning out. And you were beginning to find your place in the workforce. Let's go back to young Mike.
Well, I'll tell you, young Mike was a crazy guy. All right. So I was, you know, and folks that are listening to this, maybe you could see a little bit about yourself in my story, or maybe your story is completely different. But, you know, I was drinking and carrying on and running around with my friends and racing cars and getting into trouble. The local cops knew me by first name. I wasn't doing well in school. And a lot of people don't know this, but I never finished high school. You know, I failed my first 9th grade, tried it again, said this isn't working, and I dropped out. I did get my GED. But, you know, I thought at that point in my life, you know, what's it all worth? You know, who cares? You know, what's my future look like? You know, I'm having fun just being a reckless, careless dude. And I didn't know there was more to life, right? And so, and I say that just because that's the baseline, right? That's where I started from. And then this industry took me from that to where I am today. So let me tell you a little bit about that.
Yeah.
So, you know, doing odds and end jobs, eventually my uncle could see, I was getting myself in trouble, right? My uncle said, boy, we're going to work that out of you. So he was a foreman on a line clearance tree crew, and he brought me to work for him. And honestly, I believe he thought he was going to make me fail, right? He was going to embarrass me, kind of humble me a little bit, and get me back on track that way. What he didn't expect, I think, is how much I'd like it, right? So, as on a tree crew, you're on a crew, so you got to learn how to interact with other people, right? There's work direction that's coming from the foreman, right? This is what we're going to do today, our work plan. You're using equipment, so you start out in tree work dragging brush, right? So it's manual labor. So I was a chunky, out of shape kid. I'm dragging brush to the chipper all day long. I'm starting to use a chainsaw. They're teaching me how to use equipment, hazardous equipment. So I'm learning how to respect tools and equipment and how to take care of it. I'm learning a little bit about, rigging and stored energy and how to manage your safety and work aloft and how to be aware of your situations. And so, it wasn't long before I said, I got to get in the tree. And so I started climbing, right? And the particular company I worked for, there was a role called the top man. And the top man was the guy on a crew that had to do all the tough stuff, right? So you got paid a little bit more. And so you would climb the bigger tree, or you'd climb the tree that had maybe a bad spot in it, or you'd have to pull the overhangs off the 33 or whatever, right? That was your gig as the top man. And I recognized in that moment that through effort and determination and discipline that you can accelerate your career. So I went from the groundman to a climber to the top man in no time. And it was rewarding. And I'll tell you, when people ask me sometimes, I kind of start with, I'm a tree trimmer, right? I learned a lot about this trade as a tree trimmer, the industry as a tree trimmer, and it set the foundation for what came next. And so there's probably folks listening to this that are, hey, I was a tree trimmer and now I'm a lineman, and that's not an unusual story. There are a lot of folks that start in trees and start to do line work. And the reason is we work together. In a storm or even planned work, you'll run into each other, and honestly, the linemen make a lot more money than the tree trimmer does. And you start to look at, well, I'm climbing stuff, I'm using rigging, I'm working out of bucket trucks, I'm working around the electrical hazard. It's not a big jump, right? It's actually a pretty logical step from a line clearance tree trimmer to entry level at the lineman level. So, running into these guys on these transmission right-of-ways and seeing the camaraderie and seeing the work that they do and how they had to set up their, large equipment. We're talking about like condors and cranes and cribbing and building roads into the work and all this stuff. It's like, man, it's like, ooh, yeah, I want that, right? and that's really my story, right? I've always been sort of an adrenaline junkie. High risk work, attracted me, and I said, I got to do that. Plus, I want to make more money, right? And so I put a resume in, or an application rather, with the local utility. I want to be a transmission lineman, I said on it. It wasn't necessarily a resume like we would do today. It was just a piece of paper, Mike Starner, I want to be a transmission lineman. I didn't hear anything for like 2 years. And out of the blue, I got a phone call, and the person said, Mike, we have this is the utility company, we have a position for you if you're interested to come in and talk to us about. It's a street light servicer. And I was like, all right, I'm in. Now, this is an important part of my story, right? Because I didn't say, no, I want to be a lineman, I'm going to wait and see, right? So an opportunity presented itself. I wanted to get in with the company, and I did it, all right? So pretty cool opportunity that was, right? So started out working on street lights at night, working in and out of the city and sort of managing your own safety, managing your equipment, managing your tools, getting familiar with the electrical work. So it's all secondary work, but you're working on poles that have primary on the pole. So you're aware of minimum approach and you're being trained how to work around those hazards. So it's just the next logical step, right, in my career progression. And eventually I got into the lineman program and became a Class A lineman. Our company had a career path that required you to become a trouble man or a service operator before you become a crew leader. The idea is it gives you a sense of, system characteristics, power flow, equalizing voltages, system protection, all these things in operations that you may not necessarily get in distribution construction. And so that helps you help the control room. If there's a storm or something like that, they can put you in the role and you can go out and do some switching, or you can prepare your circuits for yourself and all that kind of stuff. So it's trouble man, eventually became a crew leader. And like I was telling you last night, this is another one of those moments where you get a fork in the road and you can sit down and say, no, this isn't what I want. I want to be an overhead construction foreman.
Right.
Or you could take the opportunity as it presents itself, and that's what I had. So in our company, you had to make a decision when you were done with your tour as a trouble man. You either go back as a lineman and take a pay cut. You could stay a trouble man, but you might be there a while. Or you could post out on a crew leader position. Well, there's no distribution construction overhead crew leaders. Mm-hmm. There's a different department. But in another department, what we called new business, which did all new work, so common trenching, telephone, gas, electric, everything from the source, mainline feeder, all the way down through 600 amp cables to pad mounted switchgear, down to 200 amp, to pad mounted transformers, to secondary services, to setting the meters, boxes, plugging in the meter, putting the customer in service. That whole process I was responsible for. And so during that, I learned how to work around gas. So we did a lot of gas work. I learned about installing the equipment properly, working with land developers and customers who had deadlines and figuring out how to best suit their needs, the customer service piece. And I could have easily said, I'm going to wait for an overhead distribution crew leader job to come open, but I didn't. I said, I'll take this, and I learned a lot more. So, for folks that are listening and are trying to figure out, is this really what I want to do? Don't think too long and hard about it. Think about what's the opportunity that's presented and how can I build on this in my career. So, from there, got into different management positions, and that's another part of the story because I think, that's how I got introduced to safety because I'm not a career safety person. Mm-hmm. I didn't get into safety until later in my career. By the time I was formally in a safety role, I was at manager level. All right, so that's different. So some folks have been doing it, maybe they've always been in safety. Maybe they went to school for safety. Maybe they were kind of voluntold at a field level, hey, we need you to be like a safety inspector or a safety coordinator or something like that. I didn't get into it later in the game. And at the level that I was brought into it, it wasn't really about like handing out safety glasses and checking fire extinguishers. Right. It was developing the KPIs, reports for board, managing your OSHA record keeping, what's your safety program look like, interventions when you have bad things, those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And honestly, like I was telling you last night, that I wasn't really into it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because I'm an operations guy.
So what's very interesting, and Mike's talking about his whole life, how these different opportunities, these different hats, these different moments, that he embraced these things and with a good attitude. And these things, all these different hats that he learned to wear and learned to manage and maintain and perform in a safe manner, all these hats that he was wearing through his career, moving here, moving there, doing all these different things, helped him get to where he's at now, to where when he looks at safety, and this is interesting, and hopefully this kind of inspires some of you folks out there, some apprentices that are just coming up, and maybe you're unsure about your future, you're not sure about what job to pick. Sometimes you got to let your career pick them out for you.
Right.
And just go with the flow and just do it, because Mike did that. And all these different hats help make him that safety person that is not in one job with tunnel vision, learning safety at this one job and tunnel vision. Mike comes from the whole vision of the whole environment of how these folks think when they're doing this, or how they think when they're working night, how they think when they're hungry, how they think when they're tired, how they think when they're on a pole, how they think when they're on the ground. And Mike has been molded and shaped for this moment with NECA. And it's amazing how his resume fits so perfectly all the requirements that NECA was looking for.
Yeah.
All of them. It's uncanny. So just take this moment and take note and consider your path, because sometimes you actually don't want to consider your path by your own mind, but let your path consider your path for you and just accept it and do the best you can do.
And I'd be remiss, being Valentine's Day, that I don't recognize my wife, Mandy, who I met at a very young age. Prior to, this is when I was still a tree trimmer. Before meeting her, I had a daughter. So I was a single father, a young guy, trying to figure it out, trying to figure out how I can be more responsible, right? The tree work was teaching me how to do that, right? Teaching me to take responsibility and to persevere and to want to do better. And having her in the background was important for me to make sure I provided some stability. But it wasn't until I met my wife and just the positive influence that she had on decision making, right? We've all been there. At the end of the day, it's a tough day. You're frustrated. You're ready to throw something at the wall, and she calms you down and says, "Listen, what's the long game?
Yeah.
What's the opportunities that this is presenting for you? How is this going to help our family if you do this or that? How's this going to hurt our family if you do this or that?" And so she's been with me shoulder to shoulder this whole time. So if you have thoughts about why is your personal life so important, you have to really consider your total health, right? And we also had a conversation. People that know me know I've lost some weight recently, and I was telling Brent, it's you have to show up ready for the job, and what I do is I go around and I talk about safety, and I encourage people to have the discipline to make the right decisions, and to take the right actions. And I was telling Brent, how effective am I going to be to talk and preach safety and discipline if I can't, I'm safety and health, and I'm up here stuffed in my clothes and I can barely walk without breathing out, So your total health requires you to look inside, not just your personal health, but also what's going on in your home life, your financial situation, all of that. You have to have order in your life if you want to have a successful career, or else you're bringing all that noise onto the job site. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine the cumulative effect of everybody's stuff that shows up on the job site. And then you get, all these things are stacking up, and before you know it, you have an event, and all these precursors kind of led to it, where you can do some housekeeping. Brent and your organization inside, you're doing some housekeeping today, right? Getting some things cleaned up. Yeah. You got to go every once in a while, take a mental inventory, look at your health, look at the way that you approach your personal life, look at the way you show up for work. What's your mindset? Because this profession is a mental game, right? I mean, yes, you got to have courage, right? You got to have some skill, but a lot of the things that decide what you're going to do next or how well you're going to do next is up here.
Yeah.
No.
Mike touched on a subject matter that is very dear and near to my heart, and that is the well-being of a person. Are you fit for duty? So in other words, what did you do before you arrived to that job site, your work zone? What were you doing? And this is the whole attitude, the whole package, to where we need to really take evaluation of ourself as our person, our personification, and how when we are melting into the crowd, when we are working with our line crews and we're part of that line team, what are you bringing to that field? Are you fit to play that game? Where we, instead of being on defense, we want to have a great offense, and we want that offense to control that ball. Well, part of that controlling the ball and winning the game day in and day out is to look at yourself. Are you, your health, as far as what are you putting inside your body, your sleep, everything, your thoughts, your thought life. Like Mike was saying, as far as your finances, if getting in debt, man, you bring that debt. Maybe you're going to lose your vehicle, your car. They're going to take that from you, and you bring that to the job. That just puts everybody at a higher risk level than they should be at because of what you're thinking. So this is very important.
And beyond that, unprecedented amounts of addiction and suicide taking place in the construction industry. And whether you're a utility or you're a contractor, what we do is construction work, right? It's the most related work that we do. And the studies that are out there, the research that's startling is just how prevalent. We lose more people to suicide than we do occupational injury and death, right? So just think about that. I mean, so what are the stressors? What are the things that lead to somebody's state of mind to where they feel like they run out of options? what can, as an employer, so this is the message to employers,
Yes.
what can you do in your workplace to remove those workplace stressors, right? Obviously, you can't affect what goes on in somebody's personal life, but you can create an environment at work that's healthy and remove as much stress as you can, and then provide options and create an environment where you can at least have those conversations. It's not a stigma. Because folks, look, a lot of you guys are staying in hotels. You're working 6 or more 10s a day or maybe more, and you're working away from home, and you're working in some pretty extreme environments, and it builds up. And even the toughest of us need help. So that's something we need to at least mention and be aware of, that in our industry, being a brother's keeper has to mean something. And so keep an eye on your crew.
And don't be afraid to have conversations with one another. Some one-on-one. Hey, how you doing, man? What's up? I'm thinking about you. You're on my mind. And talking things out. We need to have solutions. And a lot of line workers and folks in this industry, what we tend to do is we tend to isolate. We tend to separate from one another, and we cover up. We talk about putting line hose on. We talk about putting some blankets on to keep from that potential. Well, what happens is a lot of times mentally, we separate ourselves from one another, and we don't come together as that equal potential to where we're sharing that, and we're part of that grid. Maybe this guy has more load in his life than you do, but you have some more source. You have the source in you to help put more energy into him and lift him up. And we really need to look at line work as a grid, not just the physical part, but the reality of us, our humanity, working with each other, that part. And we need to stay connected to the grid and be there for one another.
And some of the stuff we've done to ourselves, right? So I think back, if you were an up-and-coming lineman, you had better know what the job was for that day. So you try to do whatever you can to learn about what the job is, so you can get materials put on the truck, kind of get ahead of the game. Your foreman better not come out to the truck without it iced down and ready to go, and the cab's warm and stuff like this. You better not show up to the job site and the lineman hop in the bucket without his rubber being ready for him. There's all these things that we do in our trade that anticipate the next move. Be one step ahead. Don't let somebody ask you for it. Be ready to hand them. Take a shovel out of somebody's hand. All these things that actually create isolation, like you were talking about, instead of conversation, right? So, yes, these are things that we want to have from an up-and-coming lineman. Have that mindset. How can I add value to the crew? How can I be ready for the next steps if somebody's not waiting on me? But don't get locked into that mentality where you can't share and ask questions and feel vulnerable and saying, hey, listen, I was going to put some rubber on, but I don't really know what we should be using here. This is kind of complex. I haven't seen this situation. Should you get some split blankets out? Are you going to use hoods? That's the kind of conversation that gets skipped because we don't want to be embarrassed that we don't know what the next step is.
So let's have Mike share with us a little bit about his responsibility. Talking with him last night, I was fascinated with NECA and the association, the makeup of NECA, the districts, and all the things that make up NECA, the whole construct. It's just flat amazing, and if you can share some of that with us, Mike.
Well, so I got to give credit to our CEO, David Long, who had a vision, right, to how to better serve our what we call District 10, which is our outside line contractors. So, if the way NECA is set up, we represent the electrical contracting industry. So you think about all the different elements of our industry, but generally you fall into either inside, the customer side of the point of service, or the outside. Utility side of the point of service. That's generally how it shakes down. And for us, those contractors fall within District 10. My role is to support our District 10 contractors. So before me, my partner, Wes Wheeler, who is an outstanding safety professional, really his heart is in it. He's an inside wireman by trade. He had to take care of all this stuff. So you think about how broad our industry is and all the needs our customers have and all the different opportunities NECA has to have influence. That's a bit tall order. So, like I said, in 21, they hired me, and my mission was, serve District 10. All right, so that's like the direct service that I provide. So, contractors that have questions, or they want to, we offer products or services that help them be more competitive, or help to educate their people in safety and health. That's that direct interaction. But more importantly, what we do at the national level, because our chapters are pretty sophisticated in themselves, right? They don't necessarily need me coming to their chapter and talking about how to do an investigation or this and that. Where our chapters benefit from NECA National safety and health presence is through influence and branding. And so we make sure we have a seat at the table so that we're not on the menu, right? So if there's interest, things being discussed at the table, we have a chance to weigh in. And like I said earlier, even if you're not a member, you benefit from that, right? Because I'll be honest with you, I go to a lot of committee meetings and places where our industry issues are at stake, and there's not a lot of people at the table from our industry. So everything from working with, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, they have a construction work group. They also have a utility work group. When you sit in those meetings, they're talking about our issues, but there's not a lot of people, it tends to be a lot of people that are kind of on the outside of our industry, other trades. So they don't necessarily have our members' interests in mind. So we want to make sure we're sitting there. If it's a regulatory issue, we want to make sure we understand the regulatory issue and we participate in the rulemaking process. So either by providing public comments or finding our members that meet the requirements as a small business, making sure they have an opportunity to talk about how this new rule may affect them. Maybe it'd be burdensome or infeasible, and they have a chance to say that. We also have seats in, everything from standard, consensus standard developers, so the NESC, the NEC, 70E, the ANSI standards, ASTM standards. We make sure, again, have a seat at the table, so we're not on the menu. And that has a beneficial effect for everyone. And so that's why, when we started talking about my background, I think that's why I want to make this clear for folks, is that your background helps put you in a position to where you can add value, and I'm at the point in my career where I can pay it back, and also pay it forward. And so, we service our members directly, and then we have this outreach and this branding that we do in a more national sense, and then we also support organizations that are like-minded, right? That's why I'm here today at ECOS. This is something that is lined up with our mission, right? Because we want to raise the tide. And when you raise the tide, look, let's be honest, guys. This industry is fragmented unnecessarily, right? So whether you're talking about, I work for the utility, or those contractors over there, or I'm union and there's non-union guys over there, or I'm a distribution guy and there's transmission guys over there, or I'm a substation, whatever it is, safety and operations. There's all these different ways that we put ourselves at odds with each other unnecessarily. And what we need to do is shine the light in the dark places. And that's really the essence of the dark woods conversation, right? So what makes the dark woods scary? It's the unknown. And so whether, you look, it's a movie or a book or something, there's a fairy tale or the things of nightmares, there's usually some unknown reason, but the dark woods is a scary place. And that's where our industry is really at now and headed into the future. And the only way we're going to survive the path through the dark woods is by shining as much light as we can. Remove all those barriers, all those walls between this one and that one, and say, okay, look, we're using all the same workforce, right? The lineman today doesn't stay in one place very long. That's just the way it is, and they have reasons for that, and so that's just a reality. How do we recognize that they're working for me today, they're working for you tomorrow? How do we share the same? How do we communicate using the same language? How do we share lessons learned from events that we've had? How can we say, hey, listen, this happened on the West Coast, but it sure as hell can happen over here on the East Coast? How do we have those conversations? And the only way we do it is through opportunities like this. So,
so it's really neat. Mike brought up giving back, and NECA coming here and sponsoring and bringing Mike here to be part of this, and all you folks, you all receive all these at no cost, and that's what NECA's paying for it, Bieer's paying for it, all these folks that are sponsoring ECOS in the last 2 years. They're paying for it, basically. And you guys receive this for free, but those dark woods, this is near to dear to my heart too, and that's why when Mike said, "Hey, this is my subject," I'm like, "Dang!" And then I have all these memories, like you'll have all these memories, and you'll have you'll flash back to all these things that have happened in your past. Well, these things that happened in your past, they happen so you can learn. They happened in your past so you can be better from it, and they won't happen again. Many times when hunting in Arizona, I have my compass. It's a beautiful day like today, blue, or maybe there's some storm clouds along the mountaintops wanting to come into the valleys where I'll be hunting along the ridge line or maybe along the meadow, and the sun starts going down, and you start losing the ability to see those landmarks that you were placing in your head on the way to the job site, hunting, job site, all right? And what happens is that sun goes down, and it can go down really fast. You run into a situation where you need to just pause and look at that scenario, pause the job, and kick back and talk it over with one another. Whether you're an apprentice, you all have the ability to stop work. You have that authority. And we got to go back to the compass. We got to go back to our training. You know, our jib got stuck up in some cables or something, and it's a complicated mess, and we just got stuck. How do we get it out? You know, I've seen a picture of the guy standing on the glass trying to get out with no fall restraint. So what do? We need to not do these things. We need to talk it over. So these dark woods, they happen pretty much almost daily. Sometimes the darkness is just dusk. Sometimes it's a little gray, but you know what that means. You lose those landmarks. You lose focus of that compass, your training. And so we need to reevaluate. We need to come back to that foundation.
Yeah, I think another way to add some more detail to this conversation is to just frame up, you know, all the different aspects of influence that we're going to be facing. Negative influence, negative pressure. So, you know, folks that are safety professionals listening to this right now, we understand what error-likely conditions and situations are. You know, and precursors and things that kind of stack the deck against you, right? Let's just talk about this for a minute, about really where this industry is and where we're headed, all right? So we all know there's a big effort, and it's needed, right? The infrastructure needs work, right? So everything from improving reliability to expanding capacity, interconnection between transmissions. So, you know, large, you know, generation's an issue, large transmission projects, improving, you know, interconnectivity, expansion of the grid, you know, more redundancy, resiliency into the grid, system hardening, you know, building things so that they can weather the storms. Like, you know, a shout out to FPL with the Ian, right?
Yeah.
The Ian came through and blew through there, one of the largest storms we've seen, and they had everything back in service in no time, right? Because they're hardening their system, right? So that's there. Selective undergrounding, improving reliability. So these are all capital project work. This is capital project work. So think about where the undue or negative pressure starts, right? So wherever you're living, you know, the regulators that, you know, whether it's a public service commission or, you know, a government entity or whoever the responsible regulator is in your environment, is going to say, hey, listen, there's a lot of money available right now that you can make some of these improvements that you've been wanting to do, and it's not going to cost the ratepayers because we can take advantage of this grant money, right? There's lots of money. How many billions of dollars are out there being awarded? And you see it, you know, you're not just going to get the money unless you can demonstrate that you can spend it, right? So now let's talk about, if you're the utility, you're feeling pressure from the regulators, your customer base, maybe even your shareholders. What are you going to do to take advantage of some of this money out there to make these improvements? Well, that's where the pressure begins, right? So if you're the utility, say, well, we have to demonstrate we can put these projects in play. So let's look at our long-range plan. Let's figure out what's in there. How can we, you know, either ramp up some of the work that we had sort of laid out over years, or how can we, you know, bring more work into the plan? And that is based on resource availability, right? How many FTEs, and I'm talking, full-time employees, whether they're utility personnel or contractors, right? They're looking at the big picture. We're going to need people, right? And we're going to need to be able to demonstrate that we have these projects in hands that we can spend this money. So that's twofold. So internally, you got the engineering and the design departments are feeling pressure. We've got to get this designed and engineered in time that we can get this out in the field and spend this money in this fiscal year. That's time pressure, right? And so they're doing that. And then, the utility is saying, okay, our FTEs, we're going to burn through our internal resources in no time. We're really going to have to partner with our contractors to get some of this work done. And look, a lot of contractors, their bellies are full right now. I mean, there's a lot of work, limited supply of linemen to do the work, right? And that's just the current state. That's where we are right now. So if we're going to do more work, the utilities are going to start to come to the contractors and say, I need you to put more crews on, or I need you to bid on more of these projects because I need to get this done this year if I'm going to be able to spend this money. And look, I'm getting a lot of pressure from wherever, right, to get this done. So I need you to come and partner with us to get this achieved. Right. And the contractors are more than happy to do it, right? That's work. We already have probably more work than we've ever seen, and we're going to see it. You can't even put it into words what kind of work we're going to see in the future. And so the contractors got to start making decisions. I got 4 good crews, really good crews. Mm-hmm. If I break them down a little bit, I could probably have like 5 decent crews, or I could probably get 6 or 8 crews, right? And those are the kind of compromises that start to get made when you're figuring out how can I help the utility meet their objectives? How, as a business owner, how can I make money off of this opportunity without hurting my people, right? So now you have contractors are figuring this out, and then, okay, so now we build up more crews, we're taking on more work. All the support staff, that's all overhead, right? Your general foreman, your safety personnel, maybe additional field support coordinators and things like that. Mm-hmm. Typically, those are non-billable positions, so you're eating cost. And this is an important topic, right? Because, look, the only thing you have to do, really, is be compliant. That's the baseline. Be compliant. Anything above compliance is discretionary, right? And it's discretionary based on how much money you have, how much time you have, and how many people you have, all that stuff, all the resource problems that we have. So if you want world-class safety, that's a cost. That's a significant cost. And how do you, generally, you have to figure out, okay, how can I bid this work so I recoup and cover my costs so my margins stay where they need to be? Look, contractors are in businesses. They're in business to make money, and they have to be effective, or else they're not going to be in business very long, right? So now, how does that affect the crew level, right? We talked about you kind of water down the bench strength of the crew. You're trying to do more with less, and now you get time pressure at the crew level. I got to get this project done. I got this one stacking up, and it's running over on hours, or it's the deadline is coming up, and they want this cut in by a certain date. Just think about that, guys, from an error-likely condition and situation. It isn't just what's happening on the crew on that day, right? Although there's lots of opportunities there to identify issues that we can intervene in and correct. It's the big picture that we have to be concerned about. All this influence is going to trickle its way through and be systemic in our industry until we come together and recognize, okay, what does our actual supply and demand look like? How are we going to upskill or reinforce field safety? How can contractors and utilities come together to address some of these uncomfortable topics like, your bid's a little high? Well, can you demonstrate why it's high? Well, we have all these proactive things, these discretionary things we're doing to make sure we don't have an incident on your system. Right. And it costs money, right? So you got to be able to have that frank conversation. We talked last night about how hot time. Apprentices need hot time. Apprentices that don't have hot time aren't very productive line workers, right? So they're up there, they're usually at the same level with their journeyman, and they're being instructed along the way. That's the next person up. That's your solution to your resource problem. How can contractors and utilities come together to figure out how do we give these guys the hot time they need so that they can top out and become a journeyman lineman, right? Those are conversations that need to be had as a community, right? And it can't be, look, I'm on this side of the table, here's the project, you need to deliver it on time within budget without any events. I understand that philosophy, but that's not going to get us where we need to go. And I think what's important to remember is it's not the same industry as it was in the 70s.
No.
You know, you think about, you know, initially contractors were brought in to do special, large-scale, complex projects that were sort of outside the norm or the scope of what internal utility resources could manage. But today, I mean, there's some utilities out there that have given up their operations entirely, and it's all contracted out, right? So contractors today, you know, I don't know what the percentage would be. I'll make a guess, but certainly a majority of construction capital project work is done by contractors. So, you know, it's one of those things like, do utilities have to do this, right? Because they could certainly take a stance. It's like, hey, look, you know what this business is. You know, you entered into this knowingly what the issues were. But I personally feel like this is an opportunity where contractors can come together with their utility customers and figure out, what's the path forward? What's the best way to deal with these issues that we're having? Addressing it as a community of practice.
Exactly. So we need to address the leadership. And this is, after traveling this country for 7 years, seeing thousands of linemen, everything that Mike here is presenting as far as disconnect, it's so real. You all know it. You've all seen it. I've seen disconnect between the same company, different service centers, just miles apart. And it's unbelievable, some of the disconnects. And it's everywhere, it's out there. But the leadership needs to be trained. So many folks are being pushed up into leadership roles under this pressure that Mike is bringing up. Under the pressure of maintenance, we have storms, we have new construction, we have these projects, we have change-outs, we're restringing. There's so many things going on out there, and all these things get in our minds. And we tend to lose focus. And we need leaders that can lead by example, that can take all these issues, these heavy weights, and handle these issues and be in shape, be trained to handle these things and set them where they need to go and position them where they need to go and organize where they need to go. But it's got to be organized here first. And so we need to have clear minds that are concentrating and understand this and have been trained up in the communication. We've got to be able to communicate. We have the Gen Z coming up, all right? Then we have so many folks still in the industry that are getting ready to retire next month. I hear about it. I have guys when I travel that tell me, oh, I'm not worried about it. This is what I hear. I'm not worried about it. I'm going to retire in 2 months. Some even tell me how many days left, how many hours till they retire. Do you think that guy is focused on safety? He's not focused on safety. Look, we need to give back until we got nothing left to give. So like Mike's talking about, he's excited about his new career. He's excited about bringing a new thing, a new life with all his experience to you all. And that's what he's here for. And NECA, and that's why they hired him. So we can evolve and we can keep on keeping on and keep being a benefit to those around us every single day, whether we're home or at work.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, there's some things that we can do, right, in the short term, right? So it's not all doom and gloom. We're positive thinkers, and we know that we can shed light and we can address issues where we get the biggest bang for our buck. And so my philosophy is keep it simple, right? The basic blocking and tackling. How are you qualifying your people to do work? Task-specific, competency-based training, right? And not just one and done. Reevaluate. You know, how proficient are you now? How proficient are you going to be when something changes in your career? You know, we see this with trucks. You know, guy is used to driving a certain kind of truck, and then gets put on a different kind of truck, and now the dimensions are a little bit different. It's a little bit taller. It handles a little differently. Did we ever retrain that guy, or at least sit with that guy and help him get more familiar with this new piece of equipment? Or do we just throw the keys at him and say, have at it? So we do a lot of have at it's in this job. So having that direct supervision is the other piece, right? There's a lot of dividends that just having the right ratio between your leadership and your field people, making sure you understand, you know, what kind of geography does this field leader need to cover? I had a leader once that used to have an expectation to strive for 5. So he wanted you to be on the job site at least 5 hours a day. Now, that can be a tall order if you got to drive from one side of the county to the next. Again, this is all costs, right? This is overhead. This is something that it's going to be a struggle for a contractor to make sense of if they're trying to make a certain profit margin. But you need to evaluate, what's your field leadership look like? How quickly can your general foreman get to a job site, and how often can that general foreman get there, and how long can he spend his day there, right? That's one thing. The other thing is, making sure that your crew foreman is aligned, right, and understands the direction, right? And the only way you're going to know that is through monitoring the work environment and having conversations and observing. One of the big shifts in our industry, safety overall, but especially in the energy industry, and utilities are really taking the lead with this, is this idea of safety differently, right? Or safety too, and how do you get from an area where you're relying only on prevention to starting to look at how can we build resiliency into our plan. So I'll just go into a minute and explain some of this a little bit. So we've seen a pretty dramatic decrease over the years in our total recordable incident rates. So just injuries in general have dropped pretty significantly in our trade. So I'm looking at utilities and contractors that do ET&D work, somewhere around 67% decrease in the past 20 years. That's significant. And DART rates, they're not as significant, so they're the more serious injuries. They're not necessarily serious injury fatality level, but they're ones where you had, some restrictions, you had to miss work, stuff like that. So they're decreasing pretty good. They're not as good as the total recordable incidents. But our fatalities, and you guys have heard this, right? Fatalities just stayed flat. And so what we believe the reason is all the low-hanging fruit's been plucked, right? So all the different philosophies over the years with safety management, all the different prevention strategies that we put in place, they've done their job. And we're getting to the point where the return is becoming less and less, right, on the investment. So what's the next big solution? The next big solution is this realization that, yes, we'd love to have target zero, but that's kind of wishful thinking. Yeah. What's a more tactical approach is to say, let's build resiliency into our work plan so that when something goes sideways on us, we have capacity to fail. We have margin for error, right? And so there's this concept where work as planned, right? So that's where we get into trouble. We imagine how this work should go. So, we put all the planning in place. We're assigning crew members. We're, scheduling the work for a certain day. We're putting in outages. We have this idea of how it should go. Now think about and I'm not a brain scientist, right? But I'm picking up a lot of the stuff as they're putting it down. So what makes us uniquely human is our prefrontal cortex, right? And so in your brain, that's the part of your brain that's responsible for reason. That's the part of your brain that can look at things that have happened in the past and then make some deductions about what can happen in the future. So prediction, right? So that's a pretty new part of our brain anyway, but it's still really just designed for us wandering around out on the plains, looking for berries to eat and hunting buffalo or whatever, right? So think about how complex our environments are. So when we use this part of our brain to do planning, there's some biases, there's some shortcomings, there's some things, assumptions that we're making that isn't necessarily reality, right? And that's what we see. Work performed is more variable. Yeah. So the idea here is that you've got this job package, it's all ready to go, you send your crews out to do the work, and once they get out there, they start making, in real time, slight deviations. Because they have to, right? There's a car parked where we went to set the truck up. There's a customer hooting and hollering at us. Do we have a conductor that, an attachment that's failing that we need to get fixed up before we start work, or, the next pole down and the locust pins broke off, whatever, right? So there's all these things, and that's a good thing that crews can have the ability to make those deviations. A lot of the deviations that they make go in the positive direction. Some of the deviations can get us in hot water, right? They put us at risk, right? And so it's an ebb and flow, things that are leading to success, things that could lead to failure, and it's real time, constant decisions being made, and 99% of the time, maybe that's not the right percentage, but most of the time, These guys do their work and do all those different changes and nothing bad happens. In fact, a lot of times the work, because of these changes, went better than planned, right? Ahead of schedule, on time, whatever.
Yeah.
The problem is that when these deviations that are negative get to the point where you run out of capacity, that's when things happen, right? That's when the stuff hits the fan, right? So as employers, as job site supervisors, as folks who are responsible for safety, it's incumbent upon us to monitor the work environment. We have to have an idea of what's going on the job. Mm-hmm. And so not go out there and try to find fault, but just review how work is performed and watch these dips and valleys and figure out, okay, that change, that deviation there was pretty cool. We could probably take advantage of that and do something differently in the future so that we have more of that.
Right.
Well, I see these guys using this tool in this way that's kind of putting them at risk, or the way they set that truck up is putting them at risk, or those are things that are going to get us in trouble. Let's correct that. That's where the work is, right? Let's identify where the variations are in advance of an incident, make those corrections in real time, but guess what it takes to do that properly? Yeah. It takes field leadership, it takes alignment from the crew, it takes discipline, it takes professionalism, it takes the ability to communicate and be humble enough to kind of hash things out on the job site. And look at it as a productive exercise and improvement, right, versus somebody's, micromanaging my job site. Look, here's what's a little bit different about our business. And I'm sure there's other construction trades that are similar, but we're not in a factory where the supervisors walk on the floor and we have cameras everywhere and it's a very controlled environment where you're monitoring everything in real time. Your production cycle, so many widgets are coming off the assembly line at so many minutes or whatever. That's not how our trade is. In best case scenario, first thing in the morning you hand them a job jacket and they go out and do the job, and we don't see them until they come in at the end of the day, right? So you're relying, that whole period of time, you're relying on the skill sets and the discipline and the training and the leadership that you expect. And sometimes if you're not monitoring and doing things to improve that or interact with that process, who knows what you get, right? And so that's a problem. That's something we can address if we all put our heads together, looking at safety a little bit differently, understanding that prevention can only get you so far, that you have to have a plan B, you have to have if something goes wrong. And like we said last night, the easiest way for guys to really put this in a mental model is fall protection.
Right.
Right, so a fall restraint system is like prevention, right? It does its job, it's going to keep you from falling, it does not allow you to fall, that's preventing, and that's great. Fall rest is resiliency, right? That's, I've fallen, and now I'm hoping that this system is going to prevent me from being seriously injured or killed, right? And that's really that mindset. That's where we really need to head. It's not this or that, it's a both, right? And there's an overlap, and the way that we do it is just by having, from the crew level, from the guy that's turning the wrench to the guy that's coming out on the job site with his shiny shoes, all of us having the same language, the same vernacular, the same approach, the same strategy, the same philosophy, and the same humility to take the industry from where it is to where it could be.
Yeah. So, Mike, share with us, because I see a big lack of this in our industry, and I think we need to develop a solution and talk about that solution, which we're talking about the dark woods. So from my perspective, being with the guys, some gals, is what I see is the dark woods, I see a lot of times starts with that job briefing. The dark woods, I see a lot of times starts with that, your job hazard analysis, your GSA, whatever you have. At the very beginning, I see the dark woods coming, but it's a bright sunny day. And it's like everybody starts doing their task. But the job brief, all they did was everybody check the box and sign off. And it's the same job brief that was done yesterday on a different job, different task, same job brief that is going to be done tomorrow on a different job, different task. And I see a huge lack and again, a disconnect from these job briefs to where it's the same old, they all look the same. And what they're doing is they're walking into the dark woods thinking they're not. So it's a false sense of security. And so what can we do how can we not have that dark wood scenario come up that we don't even realize is actually a dark wood scenario?
Yeah, the job briefing issue is really a symptom, right? There's an underlying issue there, right? It's how much value does the crew see in hazard assessment, hazard management, or do they just want to hop out the truck and do the job, right? So there's a lot of value in, well before the crew gets out there, in proper planning, right? Having all the right things in the right places. But I talked about that's work as imagined. The people work as performed, that's the crew. They have the best opportunity to perform hazard management. And so, there's been some really good research out there about just having a job briefing, a formal job briefing process has significant improvements in hazard identification and hazard, because just you're creating an opportunity for the things to pop up and have a conversation, right? So there's got to be an investment in that idea that that's going to help me prevent something that could kill me in this job, right? And so what we're seeing, and this is not going to be news for folks, OSHA's been talking about the fatal four, focus four forever in construction. It's high energy hazards that kill us, right? I think it's 1,500 joules or 500 foot-pounds of force is what is sort of like that measure to say, this is the kind of thing that's probably going to kill you. And that doesn't matter if it's, gravity or mechanical or, chemical or whatever. So this energy level, our bodies can't absorb that kind of energy. So let's start, if we're going to start anywhere, let's start there. Let's identify all the different sources of high energy on this job site. And that's where the energy wheel is so beneficial. So shout out to the Construction Safety Research Alliance with the work that they've done with evidence-based research that's really improved what we know about job briefings and what we know about high energy hazards. And they're starting to do some work right now, which is really exciting, working with the utilities, is this idea of assigning a score to the high energy hazards that are present on your job site that have a direct control associated with it, right? So that's not philosophy, that's not like ethereal thoughts floating around in space, that's direct, evidence-based stuff, right? And that's what linemen love. Show me how this and this together results in this. And that's, so the energy wheel is good for that. You can assign a direct control, and then you can feel at least confident the things that I'm seeing out here I've addressed. And then of course the job briefing is let's review what these things are, because the job briefing is really the output of the hazard assessment. Let's do our hazard assessment as a team, let's identify what the problems are, let's spit it out in a job briefing so that everybody understands what their roles and responsibilities are going to be, what the sequence of the steps of the job are going to be. Are there any critical tasks we're going to perform during this? And if we come across a critical task, are we going to kind of have a hold point where we're going to stop work for a minute, talk about it, make sure everything's in place before we move forward? That's the whole thing. And so we really need to get down to the point where we prioritize. We're prioritizing high energy hazards. Not that we don't have to talk about everything else, right? We certainly need to do that. But if we can at least address these high energy hazards that kill people, that's a great place to start.
Yeah, so these are all important. I think it's also important that we take the job brief, that's where we start, and actually have a meeting, a safety meeting on how to do a job brief, and how do we include the whole team that's there? How do we include our new arrival apprentices on this job in the job brief? We need to practice. Billy Martin, my buddy, he talks about how practice primes proficiency. And it is so important that every aspect of your job, the success ratio of your job is basically determined by you practicing it, that you implementing these things, and you do these things. And let me tell these guys.
Brent's going to be dealing with this lawnmower, but I'm not going to miss the opportunity to talk to you guys. So, one of the things that is a challenge in our trade is folks want to wear their feelings on their sleeves, and whatever we can do to sort of create an environment where people are more comfortable with sharing their ideas and things that they think would help a job move forward, I think is beneficial. So to his point, having some internal conversation, whether that's at the service center, at a safety meeting, or it could be out on a job site, this is what a good job briefing looks like. And this is what we expect, right? That's another big piece. This is what we expect a job briefing. It's not just, you have, you have a right to a good job briefing. You have a responsibility to conduct a good job briefing because everything we just talked about. We know that with some of the issues that we've seen in the past, it'll be, during the root cause of analysis, somebody will say, well, I was thinking that, but I didn't feel comfortable saying anything. And it's one thing to say, hey, listen, we expect everybody just to speak up. But think about what that looks like for an apprentice, or even just a new person on the crew who's not quite familiar with everybody yet, and how difficult that can be to. It's not always like I'm scared to say something. Sometimes it's like I just don't want to be that guy that's kind of like, everything's kind of running smoothly, right? We're going boom, boom, boom. We've got everything laid out. We're getting ready to go up and do our work. I don't want to be the guy that's going to slow things down. So we talk a lot about, stop work authority and empowering folks to stop the job. And as much as I agree with that concept, it's sort of the same thing, right? When people feel like they have to stop the job, a lot of times it's a little too late, right? Because they're going through this process in their mind. Is it time now? Is it bad enough now? Should I say something now? And you miss the opportunity. And the other side of that coin is, I don't think too many people aren't going to stop the job if they really believe something bad's going to happen, right? I know these guys that do this work. If they think something's going sideways, they say, oh, hold up, stop the pool, right? Guys will stop the job. They probably don't do it as often as they need to, for sure. And certainly younger members of the crew need to feel empowered to do that. But I would say this, and this is something that, if you ever listen to Todd Conklin talk, I really respect that he says this. You need to have start work empowerment, right? Is the job ready to start? So if you can get your job ready to start, and you're thinking about what can go wrong, and you've identified your critical tasks and your hold points, and you've approached this from a perspective that it's a fluid environment where things are going to change regularly, it's going to be easier to stop the job, but you probably won't need to because you've kind of got your ducks in a row at the front end. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so sorry about that near hazard situation with the lawnmowers coming into the sound and the view. But anyways,
hey,
that's what
listen,
we do. It's raw.
Right? That's the peaks and valleys I was talking about, right? Work as planned is not always as work as performed. And imagine what that would look like, right? So I had this incident when I was a foreman where we were replacing a pad minute switchgear. And it was in a residential neighborhood. And, we're utility guys. We didn't get out there till probably 9 o'clock or so in the morning, right? We got our coffee and we headed out, and it's a nice job. We're going to dig out the sump and we're going to do some splicing and we're going to change out the pad mount. Well, to do the work, we had to set the backhoe up on the sidewalk. It was a low traffic area. It was no big deal. So we put our cones out. We put the little barriers off. What we introduced was an issue with the school and the kids going to the bus stop. So the normal path was right through our work area. There was like a delay in the school for some reason, or maybe it was like a kindergarten class. It was like an afternoon class or something. But it was later in the morning than you would normally expect, right? We wouldn't expect to see school kids wandering around. Well, this elderly woman was walking her little kindergartner to the bus stop, and they would normally come right down where we were working, but they had to go across the street. So, she fell. Tripped over the curb and trying to get across the road. Now, we didn't directly cause that, but we had an influence in that environment that led to an event. So just, the lawnmowers in the background, it's silly and it happened here and we were laughing about it, but that's what happens to these guys on the job site. Yeah. Something comes into and upsets their plan in some way. And maybe it's just a distraction, just like that was. Maybe it's just a distraction. But it changes their plan, it throws people off, and before you know it, something happens. So you kind of got to drop back for a minute after something like that occurs and just say, everything's still good? We still lined up? And job briefings are a good way to do that. So revisiting the job briefing when things change is so important.
So another issue that I see regarding the dark woods, I love the subject, by the way, Mike. I really appreciate you bringing this up, is you're doing some work. You're changing out a pole, let's say on the road. And this event literally happened just a couple months ago. And you have your cones, you have your traffic control. One of the lanes is blocked off, and everybody's got their equipment. Everybody's going to work. We're changing out that pole, but we need to also be prepared. Not that this working in the dark wood scenario comes up from a lack of what we've done or haven't done, but what about like the lawnmowers, these outside influences? So a distracted driver, now think about this, not distracted line work, because that's an issue, but we're doing a good job here. We're focused, we're communicating, everything's good. We got traffic control, but a distracted driver comes into our work zone and takes out a couple of our guys. They spend some time in the hospital. Both are going to be okay. But these outside events, do we talk about the possibility of these things that we almost can't even control? But then what? Okay, so this happened. Now what do we do? What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's dead on. But here's the rub on that one. So think about your risk matrix, right? Your standard risk matrix is, on one axis, the probability, and on the other axis, the severity. We struggle with the probability piece, right? And there's two reasons, right? So one, the guys miss it entirely, right? For some reason, it's so abstract, it's such an outlier, the variables are so complex that it's just unreasonable to expect that person, that crew, to think about all these things that eventually led to this thing happening, right? So that's one thing. The second piece is they see it, but they choose not to address it. Now that's not always like, reckless behavior. Sometimes it's like an assessment, an evaluation of risk. Risk tolerance and drift and all that stuff. That's where that comes into play, or overconfidence in a new guy, that kind of stuff. Or, they just miss it entirely, and like I said, it's something that's hard to address. So that's where resiliency comes in, right? So there is a limit to what you can predict. There is a limit to what's probable, and the guys are always making real-time assessments about that probability and assigning sort of a hierarchy. Okay, here's what I really need to worry about. The lawnmowers I'm not too worried about,
right? So
I'm not going to address it until it becomes a problem, right? And that's what we struggle with.
Yeah. So here's another scenario. I like going organic here because Mike and I didn't talk about exactly what we were going to talk about or how we were going to even answer these things. And so this is, as you can see with the lawnmowers, this is very raw. But I had a scenario, and I'd like for Mike to kind of talk about his view on this, his perspective. I had a scenario about a year ago to where I was doing training throughout Arizona, the Southwest Territories basically. And this is the first time this had ever happened after hundreds of service centers visiting, but this is one time this has ever happened. And this really made my heart very warm and happy to see this happen. But the safety manager, safety director, literally told me I was ready to go. I had everything set up, I was ready to go. But he told me, wait, before you go, which my go time was what he was talking about, was his go time. He said, we're going to have a job briefing here. And in this job briefing, what we're going to do is we're actually going to talk about all the incidences that have taken place in the last week. And I'm like, wow, that is so amazing. And I'm like, inside, okay, he didn't see this, but inside I was going like, whoa, what a concept. To actually go to all your crews, you have your journeymen, you have folks at your CEO, and this was a true story. You had all your hierarchy, your lowarchy. You had folks that couldn't work hot. You had folks that had been working hot for decades. and they're all gathered together, team. And they literally went around and talked about 2 incidences that had taken place for that last week. And they were open about it, they shared it, they discussed it. How can we mitigate this? So it happened to me, but how can we discuss this and talk about it so this never happens to that crew over there in that truck over there? And it was just amazing. It was about 15 minutes and it was all open. But to me, them talking about their dark wood scenario helps prevent, after the fact, after walking through those dark woods, it helps prevent the other crews from anticipating, well, not anticipating, but experiencing the same situation. And I just thought that was amazing.
Yeah, no, storytelling is something that is very powerful. You know, and sharing lessons learned and events, that's a form of storytelling. And I was telling you last night at dinner that, you know, I watched this scientist that, you know, he's like a physics guy and he's got a show on Discovery Channel or something. He's talking about the history of mankind and all this kind of stuff. But in his opinion, the number one greatest thing man has done from a technology perspective was the written word, right? The ability to write your thoughts and experience down so that there's a record of that, so that I can hand it to you and you can pick up where I left off.
Yeah.
You don't have to go back to step one. And that's all about, and again, I'm not a brain guy, but this is where, you know, the prefrontal cortex comes in, right? This is how modeling and drilling and crew resource management helps. This is where storytelling helps, because your brain is always taking things that we've experienced, things that we know, and using that to formulate a response to something that we're predicting or making assumptions about, right? So it formulates our next steps. If you don't have anything to draw from, then your mental model of what to do next is limited, right? So that's where you say, well, let's see what happens. Let's wing it. Let's try it. If you have the mental model, and the mental model can be very extensive through competency-based training and drilling, or it could be just you sat and listened to a lessons learned about an event that occurred. It subconsciously, it plants those seeds in your brain, and now you at least have the baseline. And so another good example of that is, if I lost my shoe in my bedroom, I could probably find my shoe in my bedroom, right? Because I know where my bedroom is. I know what the bedroom looks like. I know what a shoe is. I know what the shoe looks like. I know that the shoe is probably on the floor somewhere. I usually stuff it over here, right? That's all the modeling. Can you imagine if you didn't have any idea what a shoe looked like and you're asked to go find it, right? That's why we have problems with people lose keys. They can't find the keys, because your brain is always making all these little crazy shortcuts, right, to fill in the gaps, right? The pieces of information that we actually are seeing in real time and assessing in real time that aren't just filled in by your brain's assumptions is very limited. I mean, most of the stuff that you're processing is your brain using previous experience, these little seeds that are inside there to formulate the big picture, fill in the gaps, and then make an assessment to move forward. I probably really mangled that, but that's generally how your brain, that's what makes us human, right? We can say, okay, from past experience, I can make assumptions to have an outcome that I would like to have on the other side of this. The way we can do it as a profession is through everything we just talked about. Job briefings, lessons learned, safety meetings, training, drilling, all those basic things, communication, having a humble approach to sharing your weaknesses, right? Because if I tell you, hey man, I had this situation and I've really screwed that up and I could do a lot better, I know it, any advice for me, and you have a chance to weigh in, that helps me because you're going to give me some advice, but it helps you because now you might have said, you know what, I've been doing that too. Maybe we both need some help.
So there's a lot of topics you guys can pull from this. But here, talking with Mike last night, I really got to meet him as far as a person. And I also got to meet NECA as far as an organization. And it really reminds me a lot as far as, like, for instance, Bierer Meters. They don't micromanage me. And NECA does not micromanage Michael. And what is interesting is when you allow the giftings and the assets of your employees to come forth and flower and produce and do what their giftings allow them to do, and you give them freedom to do so, of course in the constructs of the rules and you know, the work descriptions and all these things and your training, absolutely. But when you allow the giftings of your employees to flower and come forth, you as an organization, your safety, the care, and the take responsibility of each individual on that line team is just peripherally related. What does that mean? Makes it grow. Okay, that's raw too. And ECAUS, that's a result of me not being micromanaged here and doing the things that we do. NECA being here, Mike being here. This is all coming together, and this is happening nationwide. And what Mike's doing with the National Electrical Contractors Association, what's happening in that organization, because Michael is not micromanaged, is amazing. There's changes that are happening. So share with us some of that.
We certainly want to get out there and be a positive influence in this industry. We recognize that the industry has some issues that we are aware of. There's a resource and a supply and demand issue that we have to struggle with. There's a bench strength problem, right? You know, when I started, I was, the next guy up on the crew had a lot more time than me. You know, nowadays it's not uncommon for the whole crew to have, less than 10 years. So just understanding the bench strength is just recognizing that we're in an error-likely environment, and the power of partnerships is really the solution, right? So, we're going to be out there. You're going to see me. Brent mentioned he saw me 3 years ago, and then he's seen me a lot after that, right? And so you guys are going to see me out and about. We want to engage with as many people as we can to understand where the industry has some issues and where the opportunities are. We believe that safety is not a secret. We certainly share as much as we can and participate in events wherever we can, because we want to be stewards of the industry. We know that we're struggling with these high energy hazards that are killing our folks. We know that fatality rates are kind of flat, in our trade, and in some cases maybe a little bit of an uptick. So the only solution is us locking our arms together. And figuring out what collectively we can do, because if we all fall back into our camps, it's just going to be business as usual, and we're not going to make any change. So, certainly look at the way that you're doing training with your folks, and make sure that there's a competency-based element to that, task-specific, making sure, right, you guys doing transmission one day, doing distribution the next. How are you addressing that? If you have issues in your management capacity to have field leadership or safety expertise, or trainers, dedicated trainers, or continuing education, those are all things that need to be addressed. Equipment selection, involvement in the process, right? One of the things that we encourage our members, get involved, right? There's tons of, look, we don't have a lot of bandwidth, especially when you're managing safety at a company, but if you can get in on a team, if you can be on a committee, and I know we could be committed to death, but like I mentioned, these national level committees where your company can have a voice, get involved. Maybe it's a local thing. Maybe it's a local safety council. Maybe it's a utilities hosting a joint contractor safety meeting, and you can have a chance to present a topic and share it with the rest of the group. Maybe it's scrubbing an incident report to where all the the sketchy, the at-risk information is removed from that, and then it's something you can share with other people, right? So start to think about how can you, as an individual and your company, your organization, how can you add value to the industry? And certainly Bierer Meters and ECOS, you guys are out in front with creating at least an environment where people can come and have these conversations. This is a free-form conversation. We're about an hour and a half in, we're talking shop. We're talking about the trade that we love. And if you're listening to this for this long, my guess is that you love this trade too. And so I would just say that's the kind of things we're working on, and that's the things that are important to us. And it's not unique to NECA, it's an industry focus.
Yes. And folks, I just want to appreciate you all being here. Mike, man, take all these components from A to Z that you heard here today and take them to heart and implement these components. And I think with all these words that were spoken here today, you know what your strengths are. You also know where your weaknesses are. But work on these things. Share with one another these things. And I believe, and I know Mike believes this as well. That's why he called this topic the dark woods. I know he believes, and his whole futuristic viewpoint is that this will happen, this will take place, it is taking place, this is proof. And these dark woods scenarios, they're going to be gone. And we're always going to be in the light. We're always going to be happy. We're always going to come back home to our families. They'll be happy. And our environment at work, we need to just get along. You don't even have to like me. You don't have to like Mike to get along. But watching out for one another, guess what? That has nothing to do with whether Mike likes me or I like Mike or you guys as well. It's our job description. It's a line team. That's what we do as a line team. We just watch out for each other. And appreciate, Mike, you being here, brother.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the time to be here. And just one last final thought. You young guys that are listening to this, it takes time. It takes time, right? Yeah. Don't rush this profession. It takes time to get the experience you need. You need to be exposed to different environments and conditions and information and training. You'll get there. You'll make tons of money. You'll have a nice truck. You'll have a career you can retire on. Take your time and be safe, and God bless you.